From the moment we're born, the world starts teaching us who we're supposed to be, what to wear, how to act, what it means to be a boy or a girl. But what if everything we thought we knew about gender was just a story society told us? Today we dive into that story. We explore how culture, psychology, and history shape what it means to be male, female, or anything in between. This presentation is all about gender, and it's brought to you by myself, Kadeen Vialva, Kizzy Murray, and Aisha Shafi, exploring the work of Carol Tavris and the psychology behind identity, equality, and human behavior. Because gender isn't destiny, it's a dialogue, and today we're rewriting the script. Our journey begins with understanding gender and sexuality, uncovering how identity is built through both psychology and society. Next, we challenge old beliefs and myths and misconceptions about gender, questioning what's real, what's learned, and what's simply tradition. From there, we look at socialization and gender roles, examining how culture teaches us who to be and what happens when we push back. We continue with bias in research and statistics, revealing how scientific studies can reflect the very stereotypes they claim to study. Then we dive into decoding sexuality and self-justification, understanding how desire, identity, and psychology intersect in complex human ways. And then we move on to emotion, communication, and equity, exploring how feelings and fairness shape our understanding of gender and human connection. And finally, we end with reflection and discussion, turning what we've learned into awareness, empathy, and change. This is more than a presentation. It's a re-examination of how gender, psychology, and society shape who we are. Before we start this presentation, we need to understand what gender really is. Let's start by redefining what we think we know about gender and sexuality. Let's start with a simple but powerful question. How much of what we believe about gender actually comes from science, and how much comes from tradition? Now, this might sound straightforward, but it's not. Because what we often think of as facts about gender are, in reality, deeply shaped by social and cultural expectations. Let's get something straight. Sex refers to biological traits, which are chromosomes, hormones, anatomy. But gender is something else entirely. It's socially constructed, it's learned, it's what society teaches us about how males and females are supposed to act, think, and feel. And then there's gender identity. Now that's our personal sense of who we are, whether that aligns with our biological sex or not. It's internal, psychological, and deeply individual. Psychologists see gender identity as a vital part of our self-concept, and when it's restricted or misunderstood, people experience distress, confusion, or pressure to conform. Now, Carol Tavris, a key voice in psychology, argued against treating men as the norm and women as the other. She said that society, and even science, has distorted our understanding of gender by mistaking cultural expectations for biological truths. So, ask yourself, if gender were purely biological, why would it look so different across countries, time periods, and cultures? Now, when we talk about gender differences, people often assume they're purely biological, but the truth is more complicated. Yes, biology influences behavior. Hormones, for example, can affect mood or aggression, but it doesn't define our psychological capabilities or our personalities. What really shapes behavior are social factors, culture, upbringing, and the messages we receive from an early age. Psychology teaches us that human behavior is a constant interaction between nature and nurture. Tavris highlighted how early psychology leaned too heavily on biology, labeling women as emotional and men as rational, as if those traits were hardwired. But modern research shows these differences are largely learned responses. Think about it. A girl who's praised for being caring learns to express empathy. A boy praised for being tough learns to suppress vulnerability. Those patterns aren't born, they're taught. And this is what Tavris wanted us to rethink. How much of what we call a difference is really just a reflection of cultural norms? Let's look deeper into how psychology explains gender learning. First, Albert Bandura's social learning theory. He showed that children learn gender roles by observing and imitating others, which are parents, peers, teachers, even the media. When behaviors are rewarded or discouraged, kids quickly learn what's acceptable for their gender. A boy might be praised for being strong and independent, while a girl might be praised for being gentle or polite. And over time, that feedback becomes identity. Now, Sandra Bem's gender schema theory. This explains how children develop internal frameworks or schemas about gender. They start to organize the world around those schemas. Pink is for girls, blue is for boys. It shapes how they interpret everything they see. Then there's Kohlberg's cognitive developmental theory, which says children actively construct their understanding of gender as they grow. By around age 3, most children already understand gender categories and start behaving according to what they think fits them. So by the time we reach adulthood, these patterns, taught, reinforced, and rewarded, are deeply rooted. But they're not destiny, they're learned, and that means that they can be unlearned. Now, why is all of this important? Because understanding gender helps us understand people. It allows psychologists and society to see how culture shapes behavior and opportunity. It promotes empathy and inclusion, reminding us that people are not stereotypes. When individuals can express their gender identity freely, they experience greater self-esteem, authenticity, and mental health. It also helps us build a better science. When researchers stop assuming gender differences, we get fairer studies, clearer data, and more accurate psychology. And in workplaces and policy, awareness of gender diversity supports equality and access, ensuring people aren't boxed in by outdated expectations. To understand gender really is to understand the invisible rules that shape who we think we can be. Now that we know what gender is, it's time to question what it isn't. Let's separate the myths we've been taught from the facts we often overlook. Let's challenge a few myths. Carol Tavris pointed out that for decades, men were treated as the psychological default. Women were studied as variations, as if being male was the human baseline. But this bias led to massive misconceptions. Researcher Janet Hyde's gender similarities hypothesis in 2005 showed that 78% of gender differences in psychological traits are negligible. That means men and women are far more similar than different. So let's take a look at the common myths. Men are logical, women are emotional. There are only two genders. Gender expression equals sexual orientation. In reality, gender is a spectrum, not a binary. Socialization, not biology, explains most behavioral differences. And gender expression, how we dress, act, or speak, has nothing to do with who we're attracted to. When we stop comparing everyone to a male standard, we begin to measure people by their humanity, not their conformity. So, if our ideas about gender aren't fixed, how do they become part of who we are? Let's explore how society shapes gender roles and what happens when we break them. Moving on to talking about socialization, how society teaches us to be our gender. Socialization is the lifelong process of learning norms, values, and behaviors. From the moment we're born, cues from parents, schools, peers, and media start shaping who we think we should be. Bandura showed that kids imitate what they see, they model behaviors. Kohlberg found that by age 3, children already understand and act our gender norms. Tavris described gender rules as cultural scripts, invisible instructions telling us how to perform masculinity or femininity. And these scripts influence everything from the careers we choose to how we express emotion to how we form relationships. Society teaches men to be assertive, independent, and dominant, and women to be nurturing, cooperative, and emotional. And even though these roles evolve, they still influence our behavior today. So when we talk about gender roles, we're really talking about learned performances that shape identity. There are consequences to all this socialization. When we internalize rigid gender roles, they start to limit our potential. They reinforce inequality in education, in careers, in power. They can even damage mental health. When someone feels trapped between who they are and who they're told to be, it creates role conflict and lowers self esteem. Think of the pressure on men to never cry or women to always nurture. These expectations can isolate, frustrate, and confine people. Psychologically, these internalized rules become part of our self concept. They define what we think we can do and what we think we can't. That's why Tavris insisted we question them, because only then can we start to unlearn what limits us. So, how do we break free from these roles? We start by encouraging flexibility in interests, in emotions, in how we see identity. Parents, teachers, and media can all play a role by challenging stereotypes rather than reinforcing them. Psychologically, self concept theory shows that we thrive when we live authentically, when our real selves align with how we act. When we're free from rigid expectations, we develop stronger identities and healthier relationships. Tavris reminds us to question the rules. If they're cultural, not natural, then we can change them. And today, we're seeing that shift. More people identifying as non binary, gender fluid, or trans, showing us that gender can be expansive and not restrictive. Freedom from gender roles doesn't erase identity, it deepens it. So let's pull this all together. First, gender roles are learned behaviors, not fixed destinies. Second, boys and girls are often rewarded for different traits: strength versus empathy, independence versus cooperation. Third, these learned expectations shape everything: self esteem, careers, and relationships. And finally, even though gender roles evolve, they still affect how we act and how we see ourselves. Carl Tavris said, gender roles are not destiny, they are learned scripts. And if they're learned, they can be rewritten. So, as we move forward in psychology, in policy, and in our personal lives, let's remember to truly understand gender, we must find and first understand the stories society tells us about it, and then decide which ones we want to keep. Now, at this time, I'll be handing you over to Kizzy Murray, who will now be taking you guys through the next topic of our presentation.
Pleasant day, everyone. As part of our directed discussion on gender, I'll be exploring two important but often overlooked areas. The first one, bias in research and statistics. Now, when we talk about gender, most people immediately think about cultural expectations, like how men and women should behave, dress, or lead their lives. But before we even reach those social layers, there's a deeper issue. The very information we use to form our ideas about gender and identity is often biased from the start. For decades, research has been shaped mostly by male centered perspectives, what sociologists call androcentrism. Now, this means men were often treated as a standard for humanity, while women and gender diverse people were treated as exceptions or special cases. Now, this bias doesn't just affect academic papers, it shapes how society sees itself. For instance, when only one group's experiences are studied, that group's view becomes the truth. Everything else gets labeled as different or abnormal. And the effects run deep, from how medication is designed to how educational systems are structured to how gender roles are reinforced in the media. Now, if the foundation of our knowledge is biased, then every structure built on it, from public policy to social norms, carries that bias forward. Let's take a closer look at how exactly this bias appears in the way research is done and how data is collected. For years, many scientific studies used male only participants, yet their results were applied to the entire population. This was common practice in psychology, medicine, and even product design. For example, early medical studies on heart disease focused almost entirely on men. So when women experience heart attacks, their symptoms were often dismissed or misdiagnosed because the textbook definition of a heart attack was based on male data. That's not just an oversight, that's a bias that cost lives. Similarly, non binary and transgender individuals are frequently left out of national surveys and social research. Their absence from official data can make them seem invisible, as if they don't exist in the larger social picture. And when data doesn't show their experiences, policymakers don't plan for their needs. Even in areas like workplace studies, data is often generalized from limited samples, meaning that systemic issues like pay gaps, harassment, or unequal opportunities are hidden or minimized. So, bias in research doesn't just distort our understanding of gender, it directly influences how resources, laws, and opportunities are distributed. But the problem isn't only about who is studied, it's also in the language used to describe people and interpret results. Now, language and research is more powerful than we often realize. Words like normal, typical, masculine, or feminine carry cultural assumptions that shape how results are understood. Imagine reading a study that says women are naturally more emotional. That might sound like a finding, but it's actually a biased interpretation of human behavior, one that reflects stereotypes more than science. And think about surveys that only offer two gender options, male or female. Now, at first glance, it seems simple, but that simplicity erases gender diversity and excludes anyone who doesn't fit neatly into those categories. This sends an implicit message that only two identities are valid and others are other. The consequences are real. When governments use that kind of limited data to plan healthcare or education, entire groups are left out. And when the media quotes that data, society absorbs that bias as facts. Fortunately, though, progress is being made. Organizations like UN Women's Gender Equality Data Hub and CARICOM's Gender Statistics Program are helping countries develop more inclusive approaches. They're creating tools that ensure data reflects everyone's reality, recognizing that gender is a spectrum and not a box to check. Now that we've explored how bias appears in research and language, let's talk about why inclusive research is essential, not just for fairness, but for the truth. Okay, so inclusive research matters because it's the foundation of justice, accuracy, and equality. When certain groups are left out of research, they are also left out of solutions. If the data guide in our policies doesn't include all genders, then our social systems will fail to serve everyone fairly. For instance, if studies on mental health don't include men who struggle with emotional expression, we reinforce the stereotype that men don't need help, which increases suicide rates and emotional isolation. Similarly, if women's unpaid labor, like caregiving or housework, isn't measured in economic data, society undervalues their contribution and designs policies that ignore them. Inclusive data helps to expose inequalities that were previously hidden, inform policies that reflects everyone's reality, encourage empathy by making invisible experiences visible. Inclusive research is not about being politically correct. It's about being scientifically honest. When our research reflects the full range of human experience, we create systems that are fair, humane, and sustainable. Now that we've examined how systems shape understanding, let's turn inward to how individuals experience and make sense of their own identities. This brings me to my second point: decoding sexuality and self justification. Now, decoding sexuality is about understanding how people come to know and express who they are emotionally, romantically, and physically. But this journey often takes place within a society that tells us which forms of love or attraction are acceptable. Now, this is where self justification enters the picture. This is the process where individuals rationalize their identity or behavior to fit social expectations. For example, a teenager might downplay their attraction to the same sex by saying, "It's just a phase." Or a woman might suppress her interest in leadership because she's been told it's too masculine. These aren't signs of confusion, they're defense mechanisms shaped by social pressure. In Trinidad and Tobago and across the Caribbean, traditional beliefs about gender roles still influence how people express their sexuality. Many individuals hide parts of themselves because they fear being judged, excluded, or worse, even harmed. Now, this shows how social norms can quietly dictate the terms of our authenticity, forcing people to choose between acceptance and truth. So let's explore more deeply what this process of self justification reveals about our struggle between being authentic and conforming to expectations. Self justification reflects the tension between who we are and who society wants us to be. It starts young, when children are taught what's proper for boys and what's proper for girls. A boy who likes dance might be teased for being too feminine, while a girl who's assertive may be told to tone it down. These early lessons stick with us. As adults, we overcompensate, exaggerating traits that match social expectations just to be accepted. Some might even silence parts of themselves completely, choosing safety over self expression. But here's the truth: authenticity shouldn't require permission. When people are free to express themselves, they experience higher self esteem, stronger relationships, and better mental health. Workplaces, schools, and families play a vital role in this. Creating inclusive environments where people are encouraged to question norms rather than conform to them helps dismantle the cycle of self justification. Empathy, again, becomes the key. It allows us to listen without judgment and understand experiences different from our own. And finally, let's connect everything. How the bias we've seen at the systemic level connects directly to the personal struggles of self justification. Bias in research and self justification might seem like two separate issues, but they are deeply intertwined. When research defines what's normal, it influences how society defines what's acceptable. And when those standards are narrowed, individuals start internalizing them, questioning their worth, suppressing their identity, and seeking constant validation. To break this cycle, we must act on two levels. The first level, systemic change. We must demand diversity and research samples. We must collect inclusive data that reflects gender and sexuality in all forms. We must ensure that decision makers include voices from underrepresented communities. We must also have personal change. We must challenge our own biases and the language we use daily. Replace assumptions with curiosity instead of saying, that's not normal. We must ask, why do I think that? Support others in their journey of self discovery without imposing our expectations. True inclusion happens when knowledge and empathy meets. When systems are built on fairness and individuals feel safe to be authentic. If we create a world where research is inclusive and people are accepted as they are, there will be no need for anyone to justify their identity. They will simply live it. Now, when knowledge becomes inclusive, identity becomes free. So let's strive for a society where everyone, regardless of gender or sexuality, can live without apology, without fear, and without bias. Now I'll hand you over to my colleague Aisha, where she will take you through emotion, communication, and equity.
I will be speaking on emotion, communication, and equity in gender. Firstly, we need to understand what are emotions, communications, and equity in gender and how they are tied to one another. Emotions in gender explore how gender identity and social roles shape the way people feel, express, and interpret their emotions. Emotional differences between genders are influenced more by cultural norms and social expectations rather than biology, which guides which emotions are considered acceptable to be presented by each gender. Communication in gender is a process through which individuals use their language, behavior, and symbols to express their gender identity and to interact within gendered social norms. And equity in gender means ensuring fairness and justice in how resources, opportunities, responsibilities, and power are distributed between genders by recognizing genders that may have different needs or face different barriers and by adjusting to those circumstances so that everyone has an equal chance at the same fair outcome. Overall meaning that emotions, communication, and gender equity together emphasizes the importance of fair and open expression among all genders, fostering understanding, respect, and balance in human relationships. Emotion, communication, and equity in gender are essential because they shape how people understand, express, and connect with one another. When emotions are expressed openly, communication is respectful, inclusive, and gender equity is upheld, individuals and communities experience greater trust, empathy, mental well being, and fairness among themselves. This eventually leads to stronger relationships being built and more effective teamwork, and overall, a more balanced society. Cultural norms plays a significant role in shaping how men and women express their emotions. For instance, in many societies, men are encouraged to be composed while women are expected to be more open, expressive, and vibrant in their energies. These expectations often begin in childhood and are shaped by the environment and experiences people are exposed to. and they not only influence which emotions individuals display, but also how much they suppress their feelings. For example, women may show more vulnerability, whereas men may show more anger. Now we will move on to promoting gender equity. Promoting gender equity means ensuring fair opportunities and resources for all genders by addressing historical and social barriers. Unlike equality, however, which treats everyone the same, equity focuses on fairness and support based on specific needs that individuals have. It is essential for social justice, economic growth, and inclusive decision making. And key areas include education, where equal access and safe learning environments are vital. In the workplace, it's with fair pay, leadership opportunities, and anti harassment policies, politics and policies, and through increased representation and protective laws. In community and culture, they are challenging stereotypes and supporting gender diverse individuals. Promoting gender equity requires education, advocacy, leadership, and everyday actions to create a society where everyone can reach their full potential without any sort of discrimination. In conclusion, our presentation, all about gender, explored how gender shapes identity, behavior, and society. And we also learned that gender is more than biology. It's also a social construct influenced by culture, upbringing, and expectations. And by looking at the theories presented in this discussion, like social learning and gender schema, we saw how people learn gender roles and how these roles affect self esteem, opportunities, and relationships. We also recognize the importance of removing gender biases from research and promoting inclusivity. Overall, this presentation helped us understand the value of equality, equity, open communication, and respect for all gender identities. It reminded us that breaking stereotypes creates a fairer and more accepting society. We hope you enjoyed our presentation and gained new insights into the topic of gender. Thank you for listening.